it's good to be with you guys. This is the story of Jubilee's first venture into multi-site. It's not going to be an extensive overview of our history, but we'll have something of that. Obviously, you heard Common Ground's story. Was it Wednesday or session 1? They're nearly a decade into their experience as a multi-site church. We're not even 2 years into ours. Should I use the word journey? I heard that had a bad rap earlier on. I think journey is quite good. There are lots of journeys in the Bible. Anyway, Mary, Joseph to Bethlehem. Common Ground went from a single location that already had 4 services, as you heard, to now having 8 locations with 16 Sunday services. That's a huge contrast to us because we very tentatively moved from 2 to 3 in 2016. So it's a different story, and we're still learning strategy. But on the upside, maybe our story's a little closer to where you are as well. So as a local church, Jubilee had focused on planting autonomous churches. That was really our expansion kind of structure or modus operandi. We planted several independent churches in the 90s and the early 2000s with the financial support of New Frontiers International. So we went into Muizenberg, Somerset West, we planted into Guguletu, we planted into Kailicha. Muizenberg, Guguletu, and Kailicha were more focused church plants as a community, sending a large number of people. Somerset West, being a little further off, was more about planting an eldership couple and a few friends gathered to them. And in the last 10 years or so, we've planted out 2, Table View, which is more like that community group going, and Port Elizabeth, which is more like the other version, an eldership couple going. Both of those plants have been hard going, and Table View is eventually closed. With the exception of Somerset West and PE, every time we planted a church, it had a major effect on the mother church, if you like, or the sending congregation. Loss of numbers was pretty difficult to kind of regather that and go again. Loss of kind of enthusiastic or more missional members. I do personally remember after the Table View plant being here one Sunday morning and just looking at the drop in numbers and thinking, I just don't want to do this anymore. Can we not build something, wonderfully large? And we were aware of the multi-site trend, of course. We'd seen it successfully modeled by PJ Smythe and his team in Johannesburg. PJ actually suggested at one particular point that we consider planting a congregation into Newlands, a Jubilee into Newlands. But we were cautious of splitting up what is unfortunately the relatively rare phenomena of a racially diverse church. We didn't want to mess with that one. Only a small minority of our congregation in Observatory actually live in Observatory. So to plant into one of the southern suburbs would risk siphoning off our kind of white members and therefore break the diversity, which we felt was a value. We just didn't want to. We'd rather be smaller but actually diverse than just do that. So that was a call that we made. We therefore strengthened our observatory base. We put a lot of money into renovating this building, increasing spaces for our kids' work, and so on, and we saw new growth as a result of that. So that's kind of where our thinking and where we got to in the journey. In 2015, the pastor of Cape Town Baptist Church, which was trading as City Life Church at the time, approached first Rigby and the Common Ground leadership, and then Steve and the Jubilee eldership about the possibility of uniting the congregations together. I think Riggs wasn't so keen, and we began a conversation with the Baptist Church pastors. They wanted to do a merge together with us, although happy for it to be Jubilee, but a genuine kind of merger. They had a building in town, in Clough Street there. It's between Clough Street and Orange Street. They tried everything to make it grow, including numerous appeals to fellow Baptists to help and all of that, but nothing seemed to be working. The 40 or sometimes 50 people who gathered just were unable to sustain ministry costs. They were losing, quite a lot of money each month. There was just like a blockage. It just didn't seem to work. It had once been a really thriving kind of city center Christian congregation, Christian church. So anyway, we began talking and we made a decision we were going to go for it. And so we started with some major renovations of the very unattractive interior. It was a complete, well, anyway, I don't know who designed it, but it was druggy in the 60s, so everyone was on drugs, weren't they? Anyway, we launched you'll see pictures now. We launched towards the end of 2016. I was asked to lead the team. Rigby actually really kind of spoke into my soul and said, "You must lead it." And I didn't really want to, because I'd spent 20 years building the congregation here, so that was kind of it was a wrench, and it was a difficult one to come to. But we felt together as an eldership team, and Joe and I felt, okay, let's do this. So the city congregation became my primary brief, which has been a very happy and clear, focused brief to have, although I'm still an elder over the whole of Jubilee. So from the beginning, I was keen, and one of the reasons why you've got an old-fashioned picture in front of you here, I was keen to learn the history of the Baptist church in Cape Town, and particularly this Baptist church that we were merging with. I didn't want to frame the story as the failure of traditional church and the rescue coming over the hill. The charismatic church is coming. That didn't fit with me, and it's not a particularly attractive story. I didn't see any need to rubbish the past in order to present ourselves as the future. So here's a little summary of and it is a summary. It's the more you go into it, the more wonderful it is. But this is just a summary of the story of the beginning of Baptist ministry in Cape Town. On the 19th of November, 1876, that's nearly 142 years ago, this city center Christian community was formally inaugurated. You're going way ahead of me. I'll tell you. If you go back, to there, great. So 1876, that's when it started. 1875, the year before, 3 believers met for prayer in Long Street. Just 3 believers. They had a prayer meeting in Long Street. They wanted to start a church. And so someone suggested that they write to a Baptist preacher who was quite prominent at the time called C.H. Spurgeon. He was in London. He'd been born again, and he started a kind of unofficial pastor's college to train guys. And they asked if he would send someone to lead a church planting initiative in Cape Town. And he responded warmly, and he selected William Hamilton, which is the first picture. And this guy, I should have given you the whole picture. Actually, the graphic here has been stretched a little bit. It doesn't matter. But hasn't he got a kind of Cape Town feel about him? Everyone else is very formally, quite Germanic. They're all, quite a few of them were Germans as well. They're all standing very, stiff. And this guy's like, yeah, I'm in Cape Town. And so I like that. I like that very much. He was a strong leader. He was a fruitful evangelist. It was said of him, a harmony between Calvinistic theology, evangelical activism, and Christian piety was a characteristic feature of Mr. Hamilton's ministry. Brilliant. Calvinistic theology, evangelical activism, meaning evangelism, and Christian piety. He got himself organized after a 3-month voyage, so never complain about a 40-minute delay on a flight ever again. After a 3-month voyage, he arrived in Cape Town in November 1876. He held his first meeting on the 12th of November in the Temperance Hall, Long Street, which gathered 60 people, pretty encouraging, and the church was constituted on the 19th of November, 1876. So that's our birthday. And each year we this is something I've just begun actually in the last 2 years. That's the celebratory moment for the launch of this congregation, which we now are. I'm kind of celebrating that moment rather than the first Sunday that we met as Jubilee, because this is part of our story now. 9 people agreed to become members, and they signed this covenantal statement. So that's the text one. We do hold, this is what they had to agree to, we do hold that the scriptures of the Old and New Testaments to be our only rule of faith and guidance. The scriptures teach the doctrine of the Trinity, man's fall, redemption by the substitution of the Son of God, and regeneration by the Holy Spirit. The final judgment of the world by our Lord Jesus Christ, the eternal reward of the righteous, and eternal punishment of the wicked. While God in his sovereign mercy can call whom he will, the world is invited to embrace the gospel. The Church of Christ, as set forth in the New Testament, is composed of those who trust alone to Christ for salvation, profess his name before the world, and obey the ordinances of baptism and the Lord's Supper. We shall endeavor to the utmost of our ability to further the cause of God amongst us by fervent prayer, diligent attendance on the means of grace. That means coming every Sunday. They got them to agree. They got them to agree to that before they were allowed to be members. Pecuniary assistance, that means giving money, in support of the ministry, and by trying to get others to attend the house of God. I think this is, although it does have that feel of just coming out of Bible college, it is a great kind of rallying call to that first group of 9 people, which included Hamilton himself. So regular prayer meetings were held in a portrait saloon in Caledon Street. The church grew. Sunday services were started in the Odd Fellows Hall, now gone, in Plain Street. Here's a picture of Long Street around that time, gives you just an idea of what Cape Town looked like. And Hamilton's evangelistic zeal bore a lot of fruit in Cape Town. 26 conversions recorded on one evening meeting. So he was going for it evangelistically. After a few years, the church had grown to such an extent they were able to build their first church facility. And this next slide is a page from my own copy of Spurgeon's Sword and the Trowel, where he announces the completion of the Whale Street building. That was the building. That's a kind of squeezed version of the building that they had. Spurgeon writes this underneath: most of our readers must be familiar with the story of Mr. Hamilton's work in Cape Town, for our pages have often contained notices of his self-denying and arduous labors. Leaving the pastor's college in 1876, he accepted an invitation from a small company of baptized believers who desired to form a church upon what they considered the principles of the New Testament. For some years, in various halls and with varying success, the work was prosecuted with great vigor, and at last, on March the 9th, 1882, the pastor had the inexpressible delight of preaching in the new chapel. That's not bad, is it, for just 6 years? It's not bad for 6 years. And here's a photograph of the building, which was the background slide. Anyway, you can see that same building on the left over there. You see the slightly gray building. So the good news, though, as I began searching through the National Archives at the library, searching online and trying to get any kind of information I could about the formation of this church, I discovered that Hamilton didn't only preach in the town center, but he also preached out in what we now know as the suburbs. And to my amazement, as I looked into this history, I discovered that it was the evangelistic preaching of William Hamilton himself in Wynberg that led to the formation of another Baptist church, Wynberg Baptist Church. Now, that was a huge discovery for me, because about 100 years later, after that church was planted by Hamilton, in 1983, several idealistic young people from Wynberg Baptist Church launched out and began a church called Jubilee Community Church. So it was called Vineyard at first, and then we changed our name to Jubilee Community Church. So the roots of both Jubilee Community Church and Cape Town Baptist Church go back to William Hamilton. And there's a wonderful sense of it kind of coming around together in the heart of God. Now, if you like history, then you kind of go, because that is kind of cool. The congregation outgrew the Whale Street building, and in the middle of the last century, as I say, the strange and wonderful 60s, they moved to the current location where we are now. The church continued to grow and thrive. I think Terran Williams got saved through a camp that was organized by that church. Lots of people came to Christ. But Following a period, as I've said, of what seemed to just be an irreversible decline, the Baptist leaders approached us to see if we could collaborate. So this is kind of recycling on a kind of church-wide scale. And there's a rather corny slide that illustrates that there. So we started on the renovations. If you go to the next slide, the builders started smashing up this strange collection of small, unusual rooms. Go to the next slide, just outside the courtyard. We kind of knocked it all through so that it would create a beautiful kind of hospitality area. We can talk about what happens on Sundays in the Q&A if you want. We began meeting in the newly named Hamilton Hall, which we called that the small hall, Hamilton Hall. Before then, it was called Baggs Hall, after the family who donated the largest amount of money for the construction of that hall. That seemed to me to be a bit unfair. So we've named it Hamilton Hall because that's the guy who planted the church. You go to the next slide. So that's Hamilton Hall through there. But what happened fairly quickly, as I'll go on to say, is we just outgrew it. We did the research, and we should have been in there for maybe 3 years or so, and it just kind of took us all by surprise. So in the end, people were standing outside looking through the windows, which wasn't very good, and it wasn't very comfortable. And so through the generosity of a couple in the church who, when they heard that we wanted to maybe try the Christmas Day service in the larger auditorium, which wasn't renovated, and we just did some basics. They put some money in. We managed to buy some speakers, move our sound desk, and that was pretty much it. We're now in the next slide. This is where we now meet. So the growth has been really exciting. But the framing of the story in that way, honoring the past, knowing that we're part of generations of faithful prayer, of sacrificial giving, of service in the city, I honestly believe has contributed to our success, rather than, where we are now, rather than offsetting the old and the new. And I think I genuinely feel this. This isn't just strategy or an approach I'm not just spinning a story. I genuinely feel we are building on the prayers and on the faith of former generations. We are. We started a Wednesday lunchtime prayer meeting right at the beginning of the renovation process. And all through the banging and the building and the pulling and the shoving, we were praying every single Wednesday. And most of the people who were praying were these older ladies, one of whom has already passed away now, but some of whom are still with us, who were part of the Baptist church story for years. And were like, thank you, God. You are doing something fresh in our day. There was like a connection to the past. I've actually had visitors, some of whom remember when they were in Wales Street. I had one guy saying, I used to come to the Baptist church when we were still in Wales Street. That's before the 60s. And who were just overwhelmed and overjoyed that God has renewed this work right in the heart of the city. Well, you might say, well, what's all this? This is a very nice story, thanks, but what's it got to do with me? But it has got something to do with me. It has got something to do with you. We don't have to dismiss the past in order to create something fresh. I mean, don't we love church history? Because we see that God has acted, and He's the God who is and who was and who is to come. And if He was faithful in this chronic situation in the past, He can do something fresh. I feel that there's a kind of stability and continuity, that a well that, if you like, was dug by others and that nourished generations before us, but somehow got blocked up or covered over, has been unblocked and reopened to the glory of God right in the heart of Cape Town. And so the momentum is in the faithfulness of a sovereign God. It's not in our cleverness. Now, I want us to be clever in the best sense of the word, but the momentum is with the faithfulness of God. And that's true for all of us in many different ways. So whatever your situation. So I want to be learning that. I want to be learning everything I can to, I don't want a box of tricks, frankly, but I just want to learn everything I can to do things well. And we're trying to do things well. But ultimately, this is the Lord's doing, and it is marvelous in our eyes. This is God's activity. So the congregation that I lead with, along with Ryan and Sachi and others as part of a congregational team, we are part of a 142-year-long story of prayer and evangelism and God's faithfulness in Cape Town. So I've been there for 142 years now. You know, I'm part of this. This is part of our story. It's part of Cape Town's story. I'm trying to get some of the old documentation that we need to put into the National Archives as well. Now, obviously, those 141, 142 years in South Africa's history were littered with many, many, many moments of disgrace and sin and shame and racial exclusion and crime and all of that. But we now have the opportunity to demonstrate to a waiting and watching world that we can be genuinely united as one new man in Christ. So it's not a story about dead heroes. Names change, faces change, pastors come and go. Paul says one plants, another waters. It's God who gives the growth. And I do believe as well that God's preserved this space. Normally what happens to aging denominations where kind of individual churches are struggling is the buildings, the assets get sold. And if you go to England, go to Wales, you know, go to some of these places where there have been these great big church buildings, and you'll find that they've been sold off and they're now turned into apartments that only the most wealthy can afford. And it's often city center locations. By the grace of God, this particular space has been preserved, not for us, but for the gospel to be preached right there in the heart of the city. I mean, it's fantastic. I am having more fun than I've had in years, frankly. I don't know if you can pick that up. Anyway, so we're joining this ongoing proclamation of Jesus Christ as the way and the truth and the life in the heart of the city, and we rejoice in God's faithfulness. There is a picture of the outside. It gives you just that's from the Orange Street side. So the whole of this area is ours, which is fantastic. So what have we actually done then in that 21 months? And I'm going to whip through some of this so that we've got time for questions. I need to be quick. Context is key. One of the first things I picked up, which somewhat surprised me, was that I had to learn that folk who live in the city center see a difference between the suburbs and the city. Now, it's not London or New York where you have to travel 45 minutes to get to the suburbs, but there's a difference. And they resist being absorbed into suburban generalities. It's a distinct context. And so I play to it. I didn't kind of believe it at first, but it's what it is, and I'm playing to it. The term city may not be used as much as in, say, the city of London, but the reality is inescapable. So we can talk about context, but working out your context where you are, where you're planting, is critically important. So I've tried hard to establish an uncomplicated twin focus for our congregation. I've tried to keep things clear and simple and clean, especially coming out of a larger church kind of machinery. Everything can be really complex. So with this plant, and it's Joe and my fourth plant, so we have planted in this kind of way, or not multi-site before, 3 times before. So I think that's also helped get some of the things right. But I've tried to make it simple. 2 things. First of all, we want to learn about the city. That is, its history and its current reality. That means hearing different people's experiences of that history without becoming defensive on the one hand or vengeful on the others. We want to learn about the place that we're going to. We want to learn about the community that we've just kind of landed in. It means learning about the city's creativity. It means being pro the arts, which I am anyway. It means learning about its impulse for innovation and creativity and its galleries and its literary events. And it means joining that, something of that. It means engaging with the issues that are relevant in the city, some of which some pastors even, preachers think, well, that's political. No, it's about creating community. It's not just political, it's ethical as well. It means for us curating events and experiences which expose our people to that knowledge, that story of the history of Cape Town. It includes bringing in people from outside the church, may not even be believers, and actually helping inform us on that learning journey. So we want to learn about the city, and then secondly, we want to make a specifically Christian contribution to the city. Now, I think that's pretty simple. We want to learn about the city, so we're not just coming and saying, yeah, tell you what to do. We're learning, we're listening, but we also want to make a specifically Christian contribution to the city, and that has primarily meant putting on great Sunday services, I hope, and establishing midweek life groups. You've got to get those two things right. Whatever else is happening, we want to do wonderful Sunday meetings, and we want to establish healthy, growing midweek life groups. And I've even emphasized that order: learning about the city first, making a specifically Christian contribution to the city. When I've shared these things with the congregation, which I've done a few times. So we're not coming in and starting off by telling everyone what they should do. We're learning, listening, but we are also making a definitely Christian contribution. And I think that simple missional clarity for the city congregation under the overall vision of Jubilee, which is to renew Cape Town through the gospel, has helped people understand what we're doing. And the different events and initiatives can easily be slotted into one of those two categories, and it enables me to broaden what we do. So when we launched proper in October 2016, our launch celebration was on the last Sunday of September. We had on paper 61 people from Jubilee. I just went back and looked at it. I thought it was more than this. 61 people from Jubilee, 26 from City Life Baptist, and 10 stragglers, some of whom stayed and some of whom didn't. In fact, of those numbers, not everyone stayed. So there was 97 in all on paper, 61 from Jubes. And actually, even some of that number didn't come. I remember on the final goodbye Sunday here, as we sent this new congregation out, a couple said, actually, we've decided that we're not going to come. And they're living in the city. And it was just, really? So kind of, Kevin Murphy said to me, it's going to be like this. It's going to be like this. You know, the couples, when they need more space, they move out. It's cheaper in the suburbs and so on and so forth. Anyway, in terms of attendance, our first Sunday together, which was pre-launch, gathered 189. So like as soon as we touched the ground, wow, it was like a freebie, you know. And I know it's not fair, and I'm sorry, but that's just what happened. And then the launch Sunday, of course, was full of friends and well-wishers, so that number isn't properly relevant, although we have beaten that number a couple of times. But we went from 180 to 190 to 200 really quickly within a space of a few months. And we stayed around the 200 mark pretty comfortably and pretty reliably. We sometimes dropped back to 180, sometimes back to 160, but that kind of rough size of about 200, which was incredible. I mean, it gave us a few challenges, especially as that average began to increase. The first challenge was that the majority weren't Jubilee members. That's still true, actually. But the majority weren't Jubilee members, so they had different backgrounds, different shades of beliefs about different things, and that's something you need to handle graciously. We're on a journey. Sorry, Doug, spirit of Doug. You know, but we actually, that kind of language is frankly helpful for me because not everyone is at the same place. But we're trying to shepherd people, hopefully, to New Testament Christianity. So I've had to insert values into the Sunday moments, and we can talk about that a bit later on. Secondly, so that's the first challenge. The majority aren't Jubilee. The second challenge was, of course, that the meetings felt less like Jubilee than what we experienced here. And that was very noticeable when people would visit from this congregation and come and say, oh, it's not like Jubilee. And, well, yeah, because, like, we've a ton of new people who've never been here and haven't experienced particularly it was the kind of worship. The worship felt a little stiff. It wasn't quite as uplifting and we're trying to shepherd, as I say, people through. So from our figures from last year, 2017, our overall attendance has increased from last year to this year between 10 and 15% on pretty much wherever you pick it out. So we've been averaging now 250 to 260 in term time, which is wonderful, and about 220 during the holidays. I don't have students. I've only got postgrad students. No, I don't think any undergrad students are with us, which at first I thought, because there are campuses in town, but it's actually great. It means during the holidays there's not this massive drop in numbers. So 2018, May to June midterm, our average was 263, which is super encouraging. We're not even 2 years in. I'm very encouraged by that. We have passed the 300 mark once this year when it was a baby thanks, celebration. We hit 340, which is absolutely crazy, and a lot of people were annoyed because we weren't set up to say the car park's full, go park somewhere. It was just a little bit of bedlam in terms of guests and comfort of arrival and all of that. But we're still a distance from. Rigby came and preached at one of our prayer and vision evenings. Stephen Jack had said, you've got to maybe have one or two before you launch. So I decided we're going to do one a month. We're going to make it not just a vision thing, we're going to make it a prayer thing. And everyone can get involved, whether they're going to be part of the plant or not. This is Jubilee, it's us, come on, Lord. And we did it in the half-renovated, probably not very safe. We had to cordon off bits of the building to make sure it was safe. But we wanted everyone to pray. So I did one a month, and Rigby came and preached at one of those, or kind of like a 15-minute exhortation. And he prophesied, you'll be 500, much more quickly than you think. And we're not there yet, but I'm looking forward to that prophecy being fulfilled. In terms of members today, currently still less than 40% of those who attend on a Sunday are Jubilee members. So, and that's, again, because it's just catch-up. And it takes... Someone at Common Ground said it takes 18 months or something from someone coming to feeling like they will be a member. It's a longer process, and we're definitely still in that, although we have added 71 people as new members since launch, which is more than the number of Jubileites who originally signed up, which is great. And, of course, people have moved off as well. Most of those have joined through smaller city-based exploring membership courses. That's the same teaching, and it's still actually the same elders teaching on it, but we realized that doing stuff in OBS, especially for people who've never been to this building, or we do loads of stuff that happens here. So, the fact that we're part of something larger, it's a congregation of a larger church, is always being emphasized. But city guys just didn't pitch. We had 2, and I had 3 people from the city over those 2. So we've started experimenting with just dropping the net a little closer to where the fish are, and trying to make it a little easier for people to actually join without messing with any values, or it's the same guys preaching on there as we would have when we do them here. So next year we're probably going to do 2 here and 2 in the city. We probably need 6 actually, because the wait time is tough. But I feel like we've got a congregation, and they're kind of settling without becoming members, without really feeling the responsibility that they're joined in, and I'm a little bit nervous of that, not overly so. Some married couples have moved out to the suburbs, particularly when they have their first little one, and exactly what Kevin said. I mean, it's been surprising how many people have moved to the suburbs, and we're not holding that against anyone. It's just a feature of city centre life. It's been, however, encouraging to see families joining us. And, there are hundreds of families who live in the city center or just around the CBD who attend city schools, who want to build community right in the city. They actually don't want to move out. And, it's been fantastic. We've seen a really encouraging number of Afrikaans folk and families joining us, which is great. And we've also got families who come to us from the suburbs who weren't here. That's a weird one. So we've got a life group in Durbanville because we meet in Cliff Street. It's obvious, It's like we've got people who come from Deep River, So we are gathering for some reason. I don't think it's just that they only want to be part of something they feel is happening in town, but I think there's just a kind of sense that you come into the city. Again, that was an unlooked for, but it's just a phenomenon that's taking place. So we moved, from the smaller hall to the large auditorium. Life groups, we've started 9 new life groups since launch. We actually have started 10, but we had to close. One of them didn't work. So we've got 9 existing life groups that we've started since launch, and we're about to start up another one. And as I say, Afrikaners, Ghanaians, quite a few Nigerian professionals joining us. These guys it's just fantastic. Impressive, this guy he's in Investec, and this guy's a financial guy, and the people that God's adding to us are kind of city center type people, of course, who are movers and shakers. And so with that kind of commonality, it's becoming more and more diverse. At first it was definitely more white. I don't have percentages, but it's becoming more diverse. It's becoming more representative of the city center space, which is great. In terms of evangelism and initiatives, put the next slide up. We started these Cliff Street conversations. So these fit pretty nicely into the learning about the city and bringing a specifically Christian contribution. So the first one was by a friend of mine, Zahira Asmal. I met her for the first time at the Cape Town Book Festival. We really hit it off. She has written some tremendous books on inclusive city planning and inclusive city spaces and how architecture can either exclude or include people in major cities. She's focused on Cape Town and Joburg and Durban. I think she's done a book on Durban as well, but she's also spoken in Brazil and in Europe about this as well. She's not a believer in the Lord Jesus. And I had a read from her book, and then I did an extended interview with her. It was a wonderful, wonderful time. Learning about the city, hearing different people's experiences of the city. Maklatsi Mashua came as well, talked about his experience of race and history. It wasn't so focused on Cape Town, but it was a wonderful moment. John Lawson, he's a British guy. He was a gangster. His particular gang used to rob other gangs. So when they knew that they'd blackmailed someone or they'd done some kind of deal, they would go and beat the lives out of these guys and get the money from them. So that was a really good one. And Max Jagannathan, he's a Sri Lankan Aussie who is with the Zachariah Trust. He did one this year for us. So what I've done there is I've tried to maximize the geographical space. So I'm trying to establish kind of a happening in a particular place, which is why I called it Cliff Street Conversations. I mean, I also wanted to make it sound snappy as well. So it's not just Jubilee Community. I wanted to give it a kind of identity. It is Jubilee, but this is happening in Cliff Street. This is happening, in that space. And I'm trying to, I think that's part of trying to say, hey, we are here. We're on the map. We're on the map for the city, and it's happening in the city. It's not an arrogance thing. It's just trying to create place. And then on Sundays, next slide, we did an initiative. Sorry, the graphics are really squeezed up. We did an initiative over 10 Sundays of the third term. And this was me trying to communicate to our folks that we are evangelistically relevant. What we're doing is relevant. So we took 10 Sundays, 10 objections to the Christian faith, 10 minutes. So 10 objections in 10 minutes over 10 Sundays. That's what this is. And as you can see, we did things like, is there evidence for the existence of God? Science versus faith. Is the Bible reliable? What about suffering? What about other religions? And so on and so forth. If you go to the next slide, we also took videos of them. And I've done a bit.ly, because the YouTube URL was so long. It was, And also, if you put numerical 10, it doesn't come up, even though it says 10 minutes of truth there. It has to be TEN, so searching for these is not quite easy. But anyway, you can take a picture of that and look them up. We recorded them as well. Interestingly, I had a non-believer who's become a good friend over the years. He's a musician in Cape Town, and he saw the first one on YouTube, and he said, I'm coming, and he came. He nearly came to everyone. There's one or two that he couldn't get to, but he said, I'm coming for this series. Because I have visited church before, different churches across the city, and I have heard sermons about, God loves you and, Jesus and everything. He said, but this is the stuff that I need to get to grips with. And he said, I also like the fact that you're thinking out of the box. This is a non-believer. It's not just kind of the same old, same old. You're trying to... So that was an initiative that I felt was really helpful. The other thing we did last year, September last year, was a whole week of events which we called Seeking. Go to the next slide. So it was seeing and seeking. So it's seeing what's in the city, seeing the good that's in the city, and seeking the good of the city. So it fits those two simple ideas. We're learning, but we're also giving. And so that was an art exhibition, which was well done, and where we had artists exhibit who are being sold in major galleries around the country. So it wasn't like just good-hearted Christian amateurs having a go and then us not being able to say no because it's going to offend someone. It was properly curated. It was fairly rigorous, and some people did have their noses put out of joint a little bit. But the end result was a really good quality art exhibition coupled with a literary event where we had published poets reading from their poetry. And when I say published poets, again, I mean in secular journals. And we had some fantastic performance poets performing their poetry. So it was a good blend, again, in terms of diversity within that kind of literary space in town. Very well attended, that event. It was a fantastic event. We also had a documentary about forced removals from the southern suburbs, from Claremont and so on. I'd made friends with someone called Sheena O'Connell, and she gave us an advance copy of a documentary that I still don't know if it's out on TV yet, but it just interviews people who were removed, not just from District 6, but from the suburbs in Mowbray and other places as well. That was, again, very well attended. We had a panel discussion with 4 politicians. If you go to the next slide, which Ryan emceed, again, very well attended event. And then on the final night, we did a Clear Street conversation with Richard Bourgonon. I don't know if there's a slide for that. Yeah. So Richard was a Lloyd's of London broker, insuring insurance companies. Got wonderfully touched by God and is just a very, very skillful communicator to kind of CEOs, and he gets into all these because he's so good at his job, and he preached the gospel beautifully. So the aggregate attendance for those events was over 500, which for us as a single newly planted congregation was very encouraging. We've also done other little things, like we did a Just Worship evening where we, which I think is, which is, that's square, so that gives you an idea, where we, there was a kind of pressure to, can't we just have worship, and I've always felt like, not sure, but with certain gifts coming together, and I guess we need to pray for our musicians as well, but with certain gifts coming together, it just seemed right to do it. And again, it was an absolutely fantastic 2 hours of unhurried, soul-restoring, basking in the presence of God. People really, really enjoyed it. It wasn't an evangelistic thing, but again, it's building community. It's bringing people together in the presence of God. We've had a few healings happening. Yeah. 10 minutes to truth. There is a link there. Or if someone can find the link, you can send it around. We've had a few healings and then testimonies on Sundays through healings, which is also a good thing to do. We have these 10-minute slots. I'm going to rush through this last page quickly. I needed a cushion because in our structure, the preacher, whoever's preaching, preaches here in Observatory at 9:30 or about 10 o'clock or whenever it's 10:05, finishes up after 40 minutes, jumps in the car, races across to town, preaches in town. Now, when we started, it actually got better, but when we started, sometimes they were on time, sometimes they were late. So what I did was I thought, I realized very early I need a cushion, but I want to redeem that time and somehow make it missional. So that's why the 10-minute to truth idea came. And what I started with was with just interviews with people. Hey, this is the chemistry teacher. She teaches at St. Sips. This is her name. How long have you been there? You know, issues of faith, and you're as a kind of science teacher. How does that come up? Introducing people to each other in the congregation. I've done that with a Ghanaian couple. He was headhunted by Amazon in Ghana, and Amazon moved him down to Cape Town to take a leadership role in the Amazon cloud computing thing in town. That's a good story. And so what? And so how did you guys become Christians? And so I've done lots of different interviews. I've done the injecting of values in that 10-minute slot. So a little 10 minutes on why baptism in water is important and biblical, and why you should be baptized in water, whether or not you feel you've been baptized or christened as a baby. Why membership? Why become a member? 10 minutes of strong reasons why you should become a member. I've done something on friendships, because in Cape Town, the criticism we get all the time is that it's very kind of cliquey. People can't get in. So we're breaking that. We're breaking it. I'm teaching into it, and so on. And also intentionality of what Sunday looks like for someone sitting there. Is it all white? Well, that's a disadvantage. Is it all male? That's a disadvantage. What's it look like? And then each Sunday, creating timings based on gifting rather than we always start on time, but we always have 25 minutes of worship. When you're planting, it depends on how good the person, do you know what I mean? You can be flexible. You need to be deft and skillful and aware. Sometimes when you're planting, I used to lead worship. When the church we planted in Eastbourne, I had to lead worship. That was painful, more painful for me, actually, because I felt so awkward. Preaching wasn't a problem, but playing the guitar, I'm a good guitarist, but playing the guitar like in a non-performance, I couldn't ever get that right. So I'd played many times as a non-Christian and performed and stuff. That wasn't an issue. Then you're showing off, and that's all part of what makes it great. Then you come into church, it's like, I couldn't get that right. Preaching wasn't a problem. And then new initiatives, so trying to help people connect and so on. Women's socials, games, events, Sunday picnics, mentoring of business people. Anyway, let's do some Q&A. So that gives you an idea of some ideas and things that we've done. Any questions?